Hidden Passions, Chapter 8 is where we left off. I'm going to start from the beginning. Ivy Winthrop, did you say? Julian asked Tommy Biddles. She's the daughter of the former governor, isn't she? Right you are. I haven't seen her in years, not since I started law school. Which one is she? Point her out, won't you? Tommy gestured toward the dessert table where a slender young woman stood. Braces are off now, said Tommy, or she got a nose job, or something must have happened to her in the last 2 years. The girls turned into a very pleasant distraction. Julian studied the young woman, spooning a fluffy little cloud of creme fraiche onto a half dozen strawberries. She wore a short pink and white sundress that showed off her temptingly tanned legs and strappy heeled sandals. Her mane of long blonde hair spilled freely down her back, luxurious gold just waiting to be touched. Can't argue there, murmured Julian. Think I'll have a go, said Tommy, starting toward her. But Julian's arm barred the way before he could take another step. My party, Biddles, and as the host, I have a duty to greet each and every one of my guests. Julian sauntered over to Ivy with practiced nonchalance, stepping softly up behind her until his lips were almost touching her ear. I can think of much better uses for that whipped cream. Julian's voice was low and bemused, far from the tone one might use to discuss pastry techniques. Julian Crane, blurted Ivy, nearly jumping out of her sandals. You startled me. Did I? Ivy swallowed nervously. She'd known of Julian Crane, of course. Their parents had been friends for a decade, ever since her father had served as governor. But Ivy certainly couldn't call him a friend. Usually distracted by older girls or fellow tennis pals at the Harmony Country Club, Julian had always kept his distance from Ivy. And that had been just fine with her, especially after meeting Sam 2 years ago. Ivy didn't trust Julian, and notwithstanding his outrageously forward whipped cream comment, she certainly didn't know him well enough to consider whether she even liked him. Sorry I startled you, but I do believe that was the secret of the big bad wolf, murmured Julian with a sly half smile, startling little girls before devouring them. Julian then passed the tip of his middle finger over Ivy's dessert plate, stealing a fluffy white curl of creme fraiche. Ivy was appalled. She watched, incredulous, as he pulled the creme across his parted lips, then unfurled his tongue to lick it clean with an exaggerated flourish. Who gave you permission to do that? She snapped, trying her best to achieve her mother's chilliest tone of propriety. Let me give you a little tip, darling. Cranes never need permission to do much of anything, especially on their own grounds, and we prefer to consume only the best. Ivy's eyebrow rose. Am I supposed to take that as a compliment? Glance around, Ivy. Take a little tour of your girlfriend's jealous expressions. Can't you see that my selecting you to flirt with among all the other maidens is the highest compliment you could ever receive? Ivy wanted to smash the entire plate of strawberries into Julian's smug, smirking face, but she hesitated. Not only would her mother and father be completely mortified, but her sorority sisters would think she'd lost her mind. Despite Julian's arrogance, Ivy knew quite well that he was the most sought after bachelor in their social circle. She hated doing what Julian suggested, especially in front of him, but Ivy couldn't help herself. She glanced around to quickly verify that every last one of the Alpha girls who'd been lucky enough to even be invited to the cream party was now staring directly at her and Julian. Ivy was tempted, very tempted, to take advantage of the situation. A part of her wanted to string out this moment of glory and make the Alpha girls die with envy. But she refused. Ivy knew where her heart and loyalty lived, and it wasn't in the gaze of this smug jerk. Without giving it another thought, Ivy politely excused herself, then turned on her heel and walked away, leaving a completely flummoxed Julian Crane behind her. When she reached a secluded lawn chair, Ivy sat down her strawberries and pulled out a piece of paper from her sundress pocket. It had become slightly dirty and somewhat worn since she'd picked it up that morning from beneath the secret loose stone in Harmony's Park garden wall. After carefully looking around to make sure no one was watching her, She unfolded it for the 10th time that day and read the words, her gaze caressing every flourish, every loop and letter of the bold masculine hand. I'll be there, Sam, she whispered, glancing at her watch and knowing she'd been counting every second until she saw him again. Then she kissed the note and lovingly folded it back up. Mr. Crane, would you like me to tell your fortune? Alistair Crane, after observing the prickly encounter between his son and Ivy Winthrop, had wandered into the mansion's garden to brood. Perhaps Catherine is right, Alistair told himself. Perhaps pushing Julian and Ivy together won't work. No sooner had Alistair considered these thoughts, however, than he glanced up to find a very attractive young woman in flamboyant gypsy clothing staring intensely at him, asking to tell his fortune. Let's see now. In describing herself, Tabby's gone from attractive to very attractive. Seems to Timmy the old girl got carried away with her fictional facelift. Unless, of course, she's got a little crush on Alistair here and secretly wants him to consider her this way. Alistair knew little about the woman, just that she was a popular entertainer at high society parties around New England. She performed palm and tea. Damn it, that's where I stopped the fucking first time. She performed palm and tea leaf readings, tarot card fortunes, and all that sort of hogwash. The woman was a fruity, eccentric, making money on balderdash. As far as Alistair was concerned, a hired actress and nothing more. Still, there was something about her that seemed off-putting. He knew it was a ridiculous notion for an accomplished man of his status, but he felt uneasy, even nervous in her presence, as if he understood on some strange subconscious level that this was not a woman one should cross. Thank you. No, he said quickly but politely to the offer of a fortune. Suit yourself, said the woman brightly, then turned her lovely face to the Crane garden, where orchids, irises, and the famous Crane lavender roses blanketed the grounds in a scheme of royal purple. How well your gardeners have kept out the weeds, remarked the woman before turning to go. Of course, Mr. Crane, as carefully as you try to control your little garden, seeds aren't always planted where you want them. The cryptic words haunted Alistair after she left, disturbing his very spirit. What the hell does she mean by that? He wondered. Then he suddenly recalled the private investigator's reports on Julian over the past 3 months and the boy's rather intense affair with that black jazz singer in Boston. What will happen if Julian gets her pregnant? My God, is that what the gypsy's remark meant? Has he gotten her pregnant? Unsettled and in a panic that this gypsy woman might know something, Alistair decided to find her again, but when he searched the party, strangely, she'd vanished. Catherine, have you seen the fortune teller? He asked his wife, who appeared exhausted as she headed toward the mansion for a short nap. What fortune teller? The one you hired for the party. I hired no such person. Perhaps the steward girl arranged it. Alistair thought of tracking down the caterer, but decided to drop the subject for fear of looking ridiculous. Still, he couldn't shake the disturbing feeling that his fortune had been told to him whether he liked it or not. And he didn't like it, not one bit. This, more than anything, was what led Alistair to a new line of thinking about his son, and a new guest to chat with, Ivy Winthrop's father. Alistair crossed the lawn with a purposeful stride and approached the former governor and owner of Winthrop Marine, one of Crane Industries' chief competitors on the New England coast. Close to 50 now, Harrison was a tall man with a hefty build. His love of golf had done little to preserve the athletic body he'd once had as a college track star, and he now had a penchant for overdressing to compensate for his middle-aged spread. Harrison, how goes it? Asked Alistair. Not well, Alistair, I must confess. I've had bad luck lately. The business has taken an even worse turn since we last spoke. Goodness, that's a shame. Alistair noticed that his rival's sandy-colored hair was peppered with more gray than it had been the last time they met. Forcing his lips not to curl with pleasure, Alistair asked, Then have you reconsidered my offer for an alliance? Yes, I have. And And you might be interested to know that I've made some arrangements. Ivy will be free for the summer, all summer. Tell Julian there will be nothing to stand in the way of his courting her. Very good news. Alistair was relieved beyond measure. I tell you, Alistair, I can't begin to imagine what is in my daughter's mind. That boy she's been seeing is absolutely unsuitable for a girl with her background. Working class sort, roughneck type. Goodness, that must be upsetting for you and Helen. Helen doesn't know. It would break her heart after all the care she's put into Ivy's upbringing. That's part of the reason I've stepped in behind Ivy's back. I mean, I don't feel good about hoodwinking my own daughter, but what can I do? I thought for sure she would have given up on this little girlish crush of hers by now. You know, young people today, they flit from one to the next like bees in a garden. But she hasn't given the boy up, asked Alistair, intrigued. Even after a year at Rutland? Doesn't matter what she wants. I know what's best for her future. This is all for her own good. I like the way you think, Harrison. You're a man of action, like me. And men of action leave nothing to chance. Am I right, Alistair? You are indeed. Hours later, the sun came down, along with the billowing white lawn tent. Most of the guests had either departed or were asked to come inside the mansion for silver service and sorbet. Julian looked in on his tiny sister in her nursery, then found his mother with the remaining guests and kissed her goodbye. He was asking one of the servants to retrieve his Aston Martin from the mansion's 10-car garage when his mother approached him in the hallway. Julian, did you look in on your little sister? Yes, of course, mother, but she's very busy, having her own little tea party with her nanny and two china dolls. Catherine smiled. Did she pour you a cup? Oh, yes. I pulled up a chair and got the inside scoop on the, what is the word? Machinations? Machinations of the entire doll world. Mrs. Cricket is wildly jealous of Miss Bun Bun's dress, it seems. Thank you, Julian. My pleasure, mother, and I mean it. That young nanny of Sheridan's is quite fetching. Oh, Julian, Catherine shook her head, unable to keep from laughing. Do you ever behave when it comes to women? Of course. In fact, I did just now. Hands off the help. Isn't that what you used to tell me ever since I turned 15 and you caught me with that shapely little catering assistant? Let's not go down memory lane with your indiscretions, Julian. I know you're still sowing your oats, but your father and I would like to see you settle down soon. Julian shook his head. Long way off, mother. Long way. Catherine took her son's hands in her own. Son, now that you've graduated law school, are preparing to move on with your life, I'd like you to promise me something. Anything, mother. Just ask. I want you to make an effort to remain close with your sister, Sheridan, and I want you to promise to look after her, protect her. Oh, mother, you've been doing a perfectly fine job of that already. But if something should happen to me, stop it. I won't listen to such talk. You've got years and years. Please, Julian, humor me. Just promise. Okay, don't get upset. I promise, all right? I promise I'll look after my little sister, protect her, no matter what happens. Catherine's face relaxed with relief. She leaned forward and kissed Julian's cheek. Thank you, son. Checking his watch, Julian strode easily out the door, chalking up his mother's worries and as baseless female anxiety. His mind swiftly shifted to the night ahead. Timmy. Reading over this 20 years later, Timmy truly wonders if Julian still remembers that he made this promise. Eve had a late set at the Blue Note, and he couldn't wait to pull her into his arms again. He hated to admit it, but that bitch Ivy Winthrop's public rejection of him had left him harder than a pimply schoolboy with an open Playboy centerfold. A part of him wanted to kill her, and another part wanted to tame the foxy little spitfire. In bed, of course. He'd settle for venting his lust with Eve tonight, but he vowed to have another go at the feisty little Winthrop girl before summer's end. Julian. The unmistakable sound of his father's voice still put as much fear into Julian as it had when he was an awkward prepubescent brat. Instantly, he halted in the front drive, his hand on the roof of his beloved silver Aston Martin. Now what? Muttered Julian, eager to be on his way. 30 minutes ago, Julian had passed by his father's study to wish him a good evening, but Alistair looked too busy to interrupt. He and former Governor Winthrop were discussing some sort of business arrangement, and Julian knew better than to bother his father when he was sealing a deal. He just wished his father had included him in the meeting. It was a sore point for Julian. For years, Alistair had excluded him from the family business dealings. Now that he had gotten his law degree, Julian had hoped things would change, but it appeared that Alistair's throne room was going to remain off limits for years to come. Where are you going? Asked Alistair, stepping under the high column I don't know what that word is. Portico. It's like, you know, that covered the front drive. Hmm. Oh yeah, I already read that. Back to Boston. No, I need you here. Why, Father? I have plans and it's important, Julian. Stay at home tonight, and in the morning I'll tell you all about it. As usual, Alistair expressed himself in commands, never requests. Still, Julian was surprised by his father's words, and the little spark of hope ignited within him. Perhaps the apprenticeship to power wasn't so far off after all. Now that he graduated from law school, his father might finally want, even need, his involvement in the family business. Julian suddenly felt elated. Despite all the energy he put into his diversions, he well knew that idleness was no asset. History was full of princes who'd been doomed to live out their lives in the wings, forever waiting for the chance to wear their father's crown, growing older but never maturing. Dilettantism, dilettantism, dilettantism of the worst kind could be his fate. A life of utter uselessness filled with nothing more weighty than pleasurable yet pointless pursuits. Could his father's request be the beginning he'd hoped for? The path to taking over the kind of power and influence that he'd watched his father wield all his life? Julian certainly hoped so. Of course I'll stay, Father. You know I'm more than happy to do whatever you wish. Besides, thought Julian, glancing at his watch, if he stayed the night, he could call his tennis coach first thing in the morning and get a good workout on one of the Cranes courts. The regional men's singles tournament was coming up in a month, and he was far from ready for it. Eve wore blue tonight, a sequin gown that hung off her bare shoulders on thin spaghetti straps and shimmered in the spotlight like a star sapphire. At the close of her set, she nodded her thanks to the Scat Perkins Five, then stepped off the Blue Note stage. Her brow creased with apprehension as she scanned the smoky, dimly lit room. She checked every table, every booth, but he was not in that club. Where are you? Thought Eve, annoyed. He'd promised to make it tonight. With a sigh, Eve approached a shapely blonde in a lime green mini dress and matching headband who was sitting at the bar in the back of the club. Hey, Crystal. Great set, honey. She smiled and winked. Always a pleasure to hear you sing. You're the best. Crystal was in her mid-20s, a salty, streetwise woman who always spoke her mind. She and Eve had become fast friends since Crystal began singing at the Blue Note 6 weeks before. They shared everything from vocal techniques to clothes, jewelry, and gossip about the recording industry. They saw eye to eye on just about everything except one man. Crystal, you haven't seen Julian tonight, have you? No, sorry, I haven't. Good evening, sweet thing. Eve jumped. A masculine arm snaked its way around her waist and jerked her against a barrel chest covered by a cheap polyester disco shirt. Glancing up, she found a rough-looking white guy drooling over her. He had a day's stubble on his face and 5 cheap gold-plated chains around his neck. His breath reeked of whiskey, and his eyes were glazed and bloodshot. He's high. Recognizing a user was a new skill Eve had mastered since meeting Julian. Unfortunately, she had yet to master the trick of getting rid of bothersome mashers. God, she hated these clumsy, sometimes frightening passes that happened to her almost every night she sang here. Julian Crane had been the one gentlemanly exception. Since the night they met, he'd been romancing her in champagne style. All the others were like this creep, a borderline violent drunk who treated her like she was a piece of meat. Eve felt her heart race in fear every time one of them approached. Get your hands off me. She tried to infuse her voice with as much outrage as she could muster while still keeping volume low. Eve hated scenes. He laughed, rubbed his nose. She noticed bits of white powder clinging to the stubble on his face. She licked her lips, needed the hit, but the very idea of getting it from this creep revolted her. I said, let me go. She tried to push away. I got what you need, baby. A little toot right over there with my friends. We can go someplace private to enjoy it. Eve glanced over to his table. 2 more guys, just as rough looking, stared back. Their eyes were glazed, tinged with the promise of violence. A shiver ran through Eve. Party with these thugs in private? No thanks. That's what you want, baby, isn't it? He slathered in her ear, pressing his lower body into her. A little white root for your brown sugar? Eve felt her stomach turning. Hey, jackass, came the loud voice next to them. Half the bar turned to look their way. Shove off, or I'll call our bouncer to break your arms. The man looked up into Crystal Harris's hard blue eyes. They communicated one thing. She had actually seen a man's arms broken, and she'd take great pleasure in seeing it done again. To him. The guy released Eve instantly. Chill out, chill out. Just wanted to extend the invite to the brown baby here. Get lost now, Crystal demanded. And the guy did. With relief, Eve sat down on the stool next to Crystal. Thanks. You're welcome, honey. But you've got to learn how to deal with these creeps if you're gonna keep singing in clubs. I guess. But Eve didn't care to learn Crystal's dubious skills. Why should she? It wouldn't be long before Julian got her a recording contract. Then she'd be in a nice, safe studio and out of this nightclub. Eve checked her watch. I wonder what's keeping Julian. Looks like he's standing you up again. No, he'll be here. Eve, said Crystal firmly, haven't I warned you not to trust him? He's the sort who'll tear your world into shreds without missing his cocktail hour. You are dead wrong about Julian, Eve replied, pride adding a slight sharpness to her tone. He's got real feelings for me. He told me so. He's even going to help me get a record deal. Crystal's eyebrow rose skeptically at that, but Eve ignored her. And you have no idea how sweet Julian can be, how generous. Eve touched the diamond choker at her throat, but her fingers were shaking. Expensive jewelry isn't the only thing he's hooked you on, is it, honey? Asked Crystal softly, eyeing Eve's slight tremors. Eve turned away and motioned to the bartender. No, it's not that. It was it was that disco Johnny. He scared me. I just need a drink. She had too much pride to admit that Crystal was dead right about the tremors. Ever since she had started sleeping with Julian, her life had been unraveling. Her grades had plummeted from cutting classes, and drugs had become much more than recreation. At first, she had relied on partying with Julian to satisfy her needs. But during this last month, she hadn't seen him as regularly. Now one of the Blue Notes bartenders was hooking her up cocaine to keep her flying during the evening's gigs. And something that I don't know what the word is. Quaaludes. Is that a Q? To help her come down afterward. All along, Eve kept telling herself that it didn't matter, that she was in control, that this was what she wanted. She was smart with it. She could handle anything. Of course, she'd also been lying to her parents for the past few months, and that had worked for a while too. But then, just 2 weeks ago, her final grades had been mailed to her family's home. The truth was right there on paper, and now her parents knew it. She had failed her sophomore year. The furious phone call came first, then the check stopped. All in all, all in an effort to get Eve to come see them, to explain, to ask forgiveness and beg for another chance. But Eve couldn't. Her pride wouldn't let her. Her parents would take one look at her bloodshot eyes, her shaking hands, and that would be it. They would grill her, then lecture her, then demand that she move back home. Eve would never do that. At the school year's end, she'd moved out of the dorm into a tiny apartment a few blocks from the Blue Note. She'd made up her mind to live her own life. She just wished Crystal would stop needling her, and that this queasy feeling would go away. She'd been plagued with it for a few weeks now. Turning from the bar, she headed for the bathroom, continuing to scan the crowd for a sign of Julian as she went. Hey, Eve, called Scat as she passed him. With the club closing for the July 4th holiday, I got the band high-paying gig in some little town called Harmony. 5 cats are throwing an Independence Day ball. You want to be our canary? Eve needed the money now more than ever. Yeah, sure, Scat, she called, then rushed for the door of the ladies' room, bile rising in her throat. Well, Fluffy, my incantations worked fabulously, if I do say so myself. Meow. Harmony spellcaster extraordinaire proudly polished her fingernails on her chartreuse caftan, her dozen jade and copper bracelets jingling with the movement. It was quite simple to pull off, really. 2 little slip in the shower spells, and poof, Harmony Country Club's regular band had its pianist and drummer in traction. Tabby laughed at the memory of Tiffany Biddles flying into a tizzy at the news. It was her first year volunteering to head the Red, White, and Blue Balls Entertainment Committee, and she had little time to begin searching and auditioning new bands for the big July 4th event. That's when Tabby's second incantation kicked in, a standard suggestion spell she could practically throw off in her sleep. Remember Julian's offer, Scat? The night he picked up Eve? Remember how he tossed you his card and told you to call the Harmony Country Club and use his name? Pull that card out now, Scat, and be sure to ask Eve to sing with you that night. Yes, Fluffy, having Eve appear in Harmony to entertain an exclusive gathering at the country club should be just the ticket to giving Julian a nice little heart attack, cried Tabby in delight. Oh, how I love to see the cranes suffer. Meow. What's that, Fluffy? You think I should have a little fun with Eve and her parents as well? Perhaps I will, yes. Perhaps a little missive to the upstanding Professor Warren Johnson and his wife, Tanya Lincoln Johnson, is just the thing to create an evil bit of fireworks. With a devilish smile, the witch began to swirl her hand in the air. Dear Warren and Tanya, I cordially invite you both to the Blue Note in Boston to hear its hottest new jazz singer. Her name is Eve. Tabby cackled with delight. Yes, Fluffy, and I think I shall sign it a fan. That's rich, isn't it? Though I think I'm going to bide my time before posting it. You see, Eve isn't yet certain that she's pregnant. She's at least 2 months along, but with all her partying and problems, she's been oblivious to her body's changes. By the end of summer, she'll be showing. When it's more than apparent that she's carrying Julian's child, I'll send my little note. Oh, Fluffy, can't you just see their faces? Imagine Alistair Crane's face too when he hears of his coming grandchild. I'm sure he'll just be pleased as punch to welcome this newest Crane into the world. Jeez, that was a long-ass chapter. Yo, chapter 9 is called Tabitha's Diary, but I can no longer speak. So I'll be back later. Jeez. That's a long